So Chris, whenever you're ready to get things kicked off.
Sure. Um, okay, so just a couple of items on the agenda for this morning. The first one is just a discussion on working groups and sort of just to keep track of them. There is some discussion, and I'm still trying to catch up on my email. Um, and I have a long plane ride, to hopefully I can do some of that. But I think I've asked a couple of times to have updates from the working group sent to the mailing list so that we can keep tabs on what's going on if we're not able to sort of join. And, some of the work group chairs are, graciously, thank you very much, doing so. Thank you, Ram. I know I saw yours, and I think I saw one from Dave. But I think that one of the things that, we've observed is that with some of the working groups, it's kind of difficult to tell if there's anything actually happening because it all happens either on the call or maybe in Slack and then rolls off the end of the world in a day or two. So I think Brian and I would like to see a little bit more. I would just call it transparency, not that I think anybody's trying to keep anything as much as when you have conversations in a very transient forum like a phone call or Slack, nobody else can really track that. And one of the things that I think we do want to do is give people an opportunity to participate in whatever way they can. And sometimes that's going to be asynchronous if they're in far-flung time zones. And sometimes people need to be able to sort of read things. If English isn't their first language, they need time to digest. And so, phone calls are not always the best way to do that. So, if we can, start to take a little bit of the discussion, or a bulk of the discussion around some of what we're doing in the various work groups, out onto mailing lists and so forth, or just discuss.hyperledger.org. I think that would help others in the community to sort of, stay tuned in. Is there somebody speaking? No, it was just some background noise. So that's really all I had for that. And I think that maybe rather than having workgroup updates as a regular part of the TSC call, that we can just sort of do that in in email, and use the workgroup update in the TSC occasionally if there's something special that the workgroup chair wants to bring to the TSC's attention. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that makes sense, Chris.
Yep, I agree.
Cool.
Because it seems like there's not a lot happening out there, or hard to get your arms around what is there, and to try to put the whole picture together is very difficult.
Yes, yeah, and I agree. It's even hard for us that are definitely trying to do that as their day job. I think in fact, I know that there's stuff going on. I think that the problem is that it's hard to see it, or it's hard to find it, as the case may be. So, and part of that is because we've been in flux with the wiki. I realize that some of the tools have been a challenge, and hopefully now that we have the wiki live, we can sort of start leveraging that a little bit more effectively, and putting things in some sort of order so that people can more easily find things. And I do think that as Brian said in his couple of recent threads, that the more that we can use forums as opposed to Slack for some of the coherent sort of design discussions, and not just for a little bit of back and forth sort of instant messaging around a particular topic. I think that will also help people stay a little bit better in tune, since we're not able to archive any of the Slack discussions. I don't know, Brian, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's partly that. I certainly don't want to create extra busy work for people in terms of extra reporting, and so one advantage of email is in email conversations is you don't need to take a verbal conversation and try to write it down. But I just want to make sure that we as a TSC take a look occasionally at the charter and the distribution of the working groups and kind of make sure that they're still working for everyone. One that stands out for me potentially is the identity working group. I know there's been activity there, and it's been some interesting conversations and presentations. But it's unclear to me what their charter is as a group as it relates to the work at Hyperledger, right? And it may be that others are happy with that too. I don't know. I don't mean to prejudge. But some of it may be a lack of clarity around the mission of each working group, and just we should on a regular basis have a conversation about that as leadership.
Thanks, Brian. Any other thoughts? Okay. Is that my? Was there some background feedback? Can people hear me?
I can hear you. There was some feedback, some banging or something.
Oh, okay. Anyway, so then the other agenda item is a proposal that came from, I think, from Ben, but Keith Smith, I think, is on. Is Keith on?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Keith. Would like to present. So why don't we turn the talking stick over to Keith, and he can review the proposal.
Okay. Let me know if you can see my. Let me try to go full screen here. See where's. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the proposal here is currently, just at a high. Let me speak at a high level first. Is current membership services at a high level was very closely bound to the fabric itself, and the desire here is to pull it out into a separate project. We'd like to be able to and to have its own repo. There's still going to be crypto primitives that are part of Hyperledger Fabric, but this is related to the membership services API itself. So the proposal here is to there are currently two names on the table. This is showing our proposal for the name being Fabric CA. There's also the name Fabric COP, where COP is not an acronym. It's simply a means that it provides police-like security to the fabric. I'm personally okay with either name. I slightly prefer the name COP simply because we already have code naming that, and there would not have to be renaming, but I'm okay either way. So you see myself and Ben sponsors here, proposing myself and Ash Kumar be the maintainers. Let's see. So again, I've already given you an overview for the abstract part. Motivation. I should say the improvements, the changes that will be made in this is that the membership service. The only thing that is unique about it today is its T-cert generation. The E-cert generation and some of the features that are lacking in it are really available in standard software, in particular CFSSL and Let's Encrypt, which is built on top of CFSSL. So we'd really like to use this open source technology, not reinvent the wheel, and then extend it as needed for T-certs in particular. these things already support, CRLs and different things. I mean, it doesn't mean that there's not some, extensions that will be required. For example, with regard to pushing CRLs into the fabric, but the main, so that CRL list is actually on the ledger. But that part, so there will be a from a connectivity standpoint or a dependency standpoint, there will be callouts from this to the fabric, but not vice versa. So the fabric will not, ever need to call out to the fabric CA or fabric COP. Let's see. Anything else I want to say here? CFSSL already supports. These are some of the things that it already supports. CRL, OCSP, which is another way of doing revocations, certificate expiration. Supports multiple DBs today, in particular SQL, SQLite, MySQL, and what's the other one? I'm going blank on the third one here. Postgres, yeah. And also supports PKCS11. There's still some work for PKCS11 for T-certs. That's the extension part. From an efforts and resource perspective, our squad that's already working on this, what's known as COP, what we've been referring to as COP, would continue, would work on this. Obviously, let's see. Now, this would be the Fabric CA server and client CLI would be separately deployed and tested, so it will provide its own set of test cases. Given the reference for the open source for CFSSL and Let's Encrypt are there. And we'll know it's successful when we are able to have support features that we wanted for quite a while, such as clustering for HA, sort of this decentralization piece that we're also working on, and all of the other things that I pointed out up here, CRLs, OCSP, certificate expiration, etc., PKCS11. Any questions?
Yeah, Keith. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Chris. This is Mike. Why is this a separate project? If I understood you correctly, you said that you're still calling back and you still have a dependency on Fabric for it. Are you intending to break those dependencies so that it becomes a separate standalone unit?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not a required dependency. For example, what I'm saying is that the only calls back into it are going to be for being able to push a CRL list into the fabric. But that's not a requirement. You can use this without having that. It can provide everything else. Does that make sense?
So,
yes, sort of.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I had exactly the same question that Mick did. And, I've been traveling, so I haven't been able to sort of pay as close attention internally. But, I mean, if we were, I think that having the membership services or a CA, whatever we want to call it, or a COP, the function of being able to sort of manage enrollment in a network, whether it's Fabric or anything else, is potentially a good idea. I think that probably does affect the name somewhat if the intention is that we do something that could be shared across the broader landscape of the various projects that are coming in. So, I mean, a little bit of clarity, I think, on is that the intention here? And if that's the intention, then I think we should maybe make that explicit. in the sort of the charter for the project. If it is just, I need a separate repository to manage the membership from the Fabric repository, it's not really a new project. It's just I need a new repo, and so I'm just trying to understand where the thinking is with that.
Yeah.
I think that
Go ahead.
this, if I could jump in there, is that certainly we want to take one small step at a time, and the first small step is that recognizing that this component, especially what we're planning for 1.0, is quite independent from the rest of the Fabric, as we're trying to change the Fabric so that it can work with any kind of CA providers. So because of that, this piece of code, that so-called Fabric membership services, becomes quite independent. And so that's the first motivation to have it a separate repo. So once it's a separate repo, then we can talk about whether we can add additional capabilities so that it would be able to serve the rest of other projects within the community. And it seemed to be, at the high level, it seemed to be there's nothing to prevent that from happening. But certainly the amount of testings and consolidation on API calls and things like that to build in that flexibility was not in plan for 1.0 time frame at this point. So I guess that's the flexibility that we have. We can move there if we want to, but certainly the time frame that we call for is to be complete this by December, which is in line for our 1.0 plan to be released by March time frame. So that's the constraint that we have to play around with.
And Ben, that's the Fabric's 1.0 plans. Again,
Yes.
It feels like this is like what you're describing is a Fabric component. And by the way, I'm all in favor of having a separate enrollment service, identity service component usable and would be independent from the others. We have our policies set up in Sawtooth that we could take advantage of it as well. I just don't understand. And if the objective of the project were specifically create that independent service and that were made explicit, I'd be a lot more inclined to support this.
So it's Richard here. I think I'm agreeing with what some of the others have said. Having a common certificate authority or something common like this sounds like a good idea when we get to it. I mean, in Corda we have I think our requirements are slightly different, but we have some overlap. I guess my thought would be is, and maybe I'm repeating what people have said, is this just something that needs to be broken into two pieces? Having a Fabric-CA, Fabric-COP repo as part of the Fabric project, it almost doesn't need any oversight from us at all, I guess, and that's just fine. And then at the point at which it, either we've demonstrated that Sawtooth or Roa or Corda, or even once incubated, either is using it or can be shown that it would use it, or that there's agreement between more than one project that it's the right path, then we make it a thing in its own right, and it's an example of a common Hyperledger component. But we don't agree that now because it sounds like we're not quite at that point.
Yeah, I have similar feelings that, at least from the description, it seems like it's intended to replace membership services, so replace a Fabric component with a different Fabric component. The way that we've managed this might be a good general discussion for how we want to take on projects generally, but within Sawtooth, we would typically create an epic for something like this, and if there's some sort of interface dependencies or breaking interfaces, then we usually do some sort of construct in the code so that we can maintain a stable master, even though that some of the core components underneath are being swapped around. I think another consideration when we add a new project is the resourcing. And if I'm interpreting this correctly, this would be repurposing existing resources as opposed to adding additional resources for additional projects.
That's correct. This is Ram Jagadisan here. So in the architecture work group, we are currently talking about actually identity services, policy services, and the CA component fits in within the identity services. So I'm highly encouraged by the fact that we are thinking about this as a separate module that can interoperate. But I'd agree with the rest of the group here in the sense that it probably makes sense to make it a separate project if from the get-go we have the intention of making this something as an independent module that will work across several projects. So, in the beginning, if the scope is to make this a fabric component, then I would agree that it could just be a repo. But it would be great if the intention is to make this an independent module.
So, and if I can play back what I thought I heard from you, basically saying that, yeah, eventually this is something independent, and from a fabric perspective, you're looking to have the ability to be able to leverage a different CA if that if somebody wanted to do that. So this is a pluggable component to begin with, and of course we're obviously from a fabric perspective we're trying to get to a specific release time period, and so we're working towards that objective. But if the scope of this project could be made a little bit more broad, it seems to me that still could fit into this. It's just a matter that what you're saying is that certainly from an IBM perspective, that the resources that we're allocating are going to be allocated to providing the necessary functionality to enable us to deliver fabric in the March timeframe. But that doesn't mean that others couldn't contribute and collaborate on that same component to try and get it to work in other contexts as well. And actually, if the APIs are coherent, it really it should just be a matter of which function does it need, which capability does it need, and do we agree on the APIs? So I think it would be important if we were to take this step, if we could make that statement to try and get others, to potentially reuse this component.
Yeah.
Because if Corda on its way over and Sawtooth could take advantage of having an independent module that we all collaborated on that managed enrollment in a permission network, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chris. In spirit, we want to separate it out to have that independent project that one day we can take it in that direction. But for the first iteration of this, I would not like to have to inundate it with additional requirements to generalize this, so that we can focus on this in the next couple of months to have the core set of functions. At the end of, we were using open source projects anyway underneath that, so certainly, anything that isn't on top would be beneficial for other projects as well, in the spirit of trying to manage the members in the network. So I agree with your conclusion there that we want to go forward to support in general other projects as well, not just Fabric.
As an extension, this is Murali from DTCC. So can we take like two paths? I think Fabric can go ahead and do the implementation, but maybe we can start a thread on defining the API. Either we can take it as part of the architecture work group, or it could be separate. Defining the API for a CA or a membership service.
Yeah, I agree with Murali here. I think this is a great topic for architecture discussion.
So this is Arno. I also have a question. Is the plan for Fabric to discontinue supporting its basic membership service that's included in it, and then that becomes a must-have for people who want to actually run Fabric. They also have to go build this and set it up. Or are you going to keep the membership service as a basic functionality that people get out of the box, and then if they want more sophisticated membership services, they can go install that one and replace it?
Yeah, so from a code point of view, after we set up this repo for this component being proposed here, we'll remove the member services code from Fabric. From the build, the existing build there, the membership services is a separate EXE anyway. So it built two different EXEs today. So with that, then the build for the proposed project here, currently called Fabric CA, would generate a separate executable file in which the deployment would be similar to today by out of the box by default. Certainly, anyone can deploy, Fabric CA as a separate server to provide membership services without using their existing membership services. But otherwise, they could use their existing membership services such as external CA because at the end of the day, all we need is a set of certificates for members to communicate within the network. The security functions such as access control and crypto primitives, like be able to sign and verify messages, are continue to be part of Fabric. So that remains the same.
All right, thank you. So then I have another question, which is that, so I know that for Fabric 1.0, your goal is to address the problem of single point of failure, single point of trust for the membership services. Does this open source, that you're trying to leverage here, is that going to help achieve any of these goals?
Well, not really the single point of trust. That's sort of a layer on top of it that is orthogonal to any CA that you use. But for a single point of trust, it does help us in that, it's already supporting all of the databases so keeping state between the cluster members. So the clustering part, it does help us with, and as well as some of the other missing features around CRLs and stuff that I mentioned earlier.
All right, thank you.
So perhaps we could talk about naming if so that it's not the first step here is not too tied to Fabric. Maybe instead of Fabric CA, we could come up with a different name for it.
So I like what I've heard about, if it's necessary to put this into a separate repo, go that path, but that doesn't stop forward progress towards the Fabric 1.0 goals. And then as the concepts are redefined or made to address some generality, then creating a separate proposal in the future as a separate project. But meanwhile, just kind of moving forward with things within Fabric.
Yeah, I guess this is all Apache, so we could always, at some point, if there is interest, you can fork it and start moving it in so that you have, one going in a direction that's more general purpose and one that's somewhat dependent or, sort of specific to the Fabric. Okay,
yeah,
so then like this is really just a reorganization then of some existing capability, although there is, it's taking a different implementation track. It's at least, as what it sounds like right now is that it's just another repository that's part of the Fabric project itself. That then I guess gets to the naming. So probably should follow the pattern of the, project, top level project and then dash whatever. But that's, yeah. So I guess the answer is it doesn't need to be approved by the TSC is I think what I'm hearing, because it's just it's within the Fabric project and they can organize their repositories as they see fit. Just as Sawtooth and Aroha and anything else can. That's their prerogative. So I would suggest we just sort of treat it that way, at least for now, and then maybe we can have the discussion, Ram, in the architecture working group, and maybe there's interest in the general community to sort of take that thought and maybe even have a fork of the code that's working in a direction that's trying to be more general purpose.
Absolutely. So we are actually currently in the middle of that discussion. So we want to start the API interface discussion to this module even during the design phase of this redesign, and that'll be a great first step. So I'd encourage the folks working on this to kind of join in on the architecture discussions.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay.
I think that takes care of that, and then I can just sort of ask if there's any other agenda items. If not, then I think we can adjourn and give people 25 minutes back.
I don't have an agenda item, but just a question here is that since these these separate repos per projects coming up, how do we in this proposal here, we kind of added another heading here to name maintainers for the sub projects. In general, how do we manage that? Because, for example, in the SDK Node.js, I'd like to add more maintainers there, especially the developers who are working day in and day out on that repo. But since I'm not a maintainer on that, there's no way I would be able to do anything there. So what was the policy on that?
So I think, again, I think the policy for a project is the maintainers can organize themselves as they see fit. The Fabric SDK Node project was really, again, it's the same sort of thing. We've just moved the code out so that we can do a refactor independently and have something be independent, just as with the Java and the Python. I actually didn't realize that the maintainers on Fabric were not maintainers on the SDK. They should be, or if we wanted to just organize it such that, and again, this is not Fabric specific. This is just generally. I would suggest that the project maintainers decide how they want to organize themselves, and if they want to specialize in certain branches, or if they want to be covering all of the different components and repositories, we should try and figure out how to do that for ourselves. But I mean, I would see it as a function of the TSC to decide who's a maintainer. It's the policy is that a maintainer on a project can basically name somebody, and the others, just a majority of the maintainers, have to agree.
Right. So project like this, say we're going to create this Fabric CA, then the maintainer would be who would decide that? I guess that's my question.
The maintainers of the Fabric.
The maintainer of the Fabric.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as long as we have a little bit of time, I could just give a quick update on some of the things that we're working on with Sawtooth.
Sure. Dan, go ahead.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, we often don't get very vocal about some of the projects that we have going on underneath Sawtooth. So I thought I would just socialize a little bit. I think Mick had already discussed in one or two of the working groups the validator registry or the endpoint registry work that we've done to. It overlaps a little bit with the CA work, but it's specifically towards adding validator nodes and what are the permissioning policies to grant another system into the network. And then we've also started a significant redesign of how we're handling transaction families, both from client-side submission of transactions as well as how those are handled under the hood. And so we've got a Python SDK sub-project, if you will, in flight. And some of that redesign work is allowing us to carve out better process boundaries so we can actually operate separate processes within the validator that will then allow us to also support creating transaction families in other languages. So kind of on the heels of redesigning the Python SDK, we're also creating a Java SDK as the next follow-on for that. And I think once we get some patterns established there might be some opportunity to try to set up more separate projects to address some of the more some of the languages that are also popular right now. And then one of the other things on the list right now is we've got kind of like Chris had mentioned within IBM, there's a separate interface, which was already discussed a bit in the context of the Hyperledger Explorer project. We're continuing to work with that code to get that fully carved away, and there's probably some additional features that weren't discussed at the time of the Hyperledger Explorer project. But that code is going to kind of simultaneously go out into the Sawtooth core. Will be available as a UI with Sawtooth, and then of course the main intent is getting that into the Hyperledger Explorer project as another example of how to have a generalized user interface interaction.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, and I know that Gary's got Dave working on the blockchain inspector. It's had a couple of runs at getting merged. I think it needed a little bit more attention, but that's certainly also trying to get its way in as well.
Great. Well, we've got a few other things going on, but those were some at the top of my mind that when we're starting to think about, what's a separate project versus, say, an Epic or something underneath one of the projects. Wanted to kind of get those out there and maybe discuss those a little bit more in detail once they've baked a bit more.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Any other topics? If not, I'll let everyone have 20 minutes back, and thanks a lot. We'll talk to you all next week.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.